Hey Couch Detectives, it's Caroline Mitchell here. I'm an ex-police detective and crime thriller author, and this week I have one doozy of a true crime story to share with you. It's the story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and her mother Dede, and it comes with one hell of a plot twist. You won't want to miss this one. The case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and her mother Dede is well known throughout the true crime community. So if you want to skip the introduction, I'll put the timings in the comments below so you can forward on to the latest information. This case is so well known, it's been dramatised a couple of times for TV, there have been books written about it, and there's further dramatisations ongoing. It really is something that would feature in any one of my books, apart from the fact that people would read it and say, nah, that would never happen. So we go to March 2008, and this is a mother and daughter relationship like no other. Dede is Gypsy Rose's main carer, and they have an unbreakable bond. Victims of Hurricane Katrina, Dee Dee Blanchard and her young daughter Gypsy travelled from Louisiana to Springfield in Missouri and moved into a house built for them by Habitat for Humanity in 2008. Gypsy was such a sweet little girl. She had a really sunny disposition despite all her problems. She loved soft toys, Disney movies and Harry Potter books. She suffered from a range of chronic illnesses including muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, hearing and sight problems, as well as a host of severe allergies, asthma, and had to constantly wear a feeding tube. She was heavily dependent on her mother because her father was 17 when he had her and was no longer around. They were minor celebrities and they had had trips to Disneyland through the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and Gypsy Rose was 12 when she won the Ole Foundation Child of the Year. So it came as a huge shock to their supporters when on June 14th, 2015, the following message appeared on Dede's Facebook page. The message said, "That bitch is dead," and it led friends and neighbours into a frenzy as they worried about the pair and hoped that they were okay. Then in the comment section, another darker message showed up. The second message left them in no doubt that something was wrong and prompted them to alert the police. And Dede was found stabbed to death in her bed, face down, but there was no sign of Gypsy Rose. But a couple of days later, a Springfield sheriff made the following announcement. They had found Gypsy Rose and she was alive and well. But, he said, things are not always as they appear.
This is a tragic event surrounded by mystery and public deception. Gypsy can walk without assistance or a wheelchair, and she can do that very well.
So rather than find this wheelchair-bound, cancer-ridden, frail little child, they found a young woman, perfectly healthy and capable of walking on her own. So it transpired that Gypsy Rose had planned her mother's death because she didn't want to live the carefully constructed life she had created for them. She wasn't wheelchair bound, at least she didn't need to be. She could walk perfectly well on her own, she didn't need the feeding tube, and her head had been shaved rather than hair loss through cancer. There was nothing wrong with her. So what the hell happened? Well, it turns out that Dede had Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a very severe case. And in cases as severe as these, not all of the children survive as their parents slowly poison them to follow their narrative. She fabricated Gypsy's illness to gain sympathy and financial help from others. And Dede had lied so much to Gypsy over the years. She told her father wasn't around, that he didn't care, but that wasn't true. Her father called regularly, but Dede wouldn't allow him to see her alone. He sent $1,200 every month in child maintenance, long after she passed the age of 18. Because yes, this wasn't a frail little child. Gypsy Rose was a lot older than Dede said. In fact, she changed her birth certificate a couple of times as she defrauded medical professionals about her age. Even Gypsy Rose herself didn't know what age she was until she discovered it for herself. Dede received government support, disability allowance, food stamps, and numerous checks, as she said she couldn't work because she had to support her daughter. Dede was proactive about raising money herself and set up a concession stand outside her home where people could donate money to go in and watch movies, and the money was meant to go towards Gypsy Rose's medical care. But that was already being paid for by Medicaid. So the money went into Dede's pocket. And she had so much money in form of donations from celebrities through her Facebook and social media pages, as well as just well-wishers and people who probably couldn't even afford to give it but felt sorry for the pair and sent it anyway. So how and why did this sweet little girl plan her mother's death? For a start, she wasn't 12, she was 16, because her mother had lied to her about her age. And naturally, with all teenage girls, she started to have romantic feelings. And she wanted to meet a boy and have a relationship, but it was impossible because her mother was permanently with her. I mean, this girl did not get 5 minutes on her own. Her mother smothered her. And even when she went with her to medical appointments, her mum would hold her hand tightly and press it if she said the wrong thing. She wasn't allowed to have an opinion of her own. Her mother ruled everything. But she found a way. She found the little cash wad that her mum had put aside from all the donations and started squirreling away money from it every night. She managed to sneak out long enough in a shopping centre as her mum took a break and buy a laptop and phone for herself. And she talked to people online, set up a separate account without her mother's knowledge. Now, the only time she could find to do this was when her mum slept at night. And she'd sneak out of the bed and just talk to people and try and have some semblance of a normal life. So once Gypsy Rose came close to escaping her mother's clutches as they went to a science fiction convention, and when her mum was distracted, she started talking to a 35-year-old man. So Gypsy Rose started exchanging flirty texts with the man she met at the science fiction convention. They'd swapped details and they started a bit of a flirty relationship with each other, which I find a bit odd because he was 35, and though while her true age may have been 19, she didn't know that. And she was down as much younger, and she looked about 14 as well, which is a little bit inappropriate. Anyway, she tried to escape with him, and he took her back to his hotel room. But she was so vulnerable and naive, I don't think she really had a clue what she was getting into. She used to daydream about this prince coming to rescue her, because basically all she was fed on was Disney movies 24/7. She wasn't allowed to look at anything else. So she had these fantasies that she was locked away and her handsome prince would come and rescue her in whatever shape or form. But it didn't take her mum long to track her down, and she brought Gypsy Rose home. And even though the man knew that she could walk and she, was faking the whole wheelchair illness, nothing more was said. He was probably afraid to get into trouble with Dede and the police, as she threatened to call them on him for having this child in his hotel room. Gypsy Rose had one friend though, her neighbour Alia Woodmansey, and she sometimes got to talk to her alone, and she just loved talking about boys and all the normal things that a teenager would be interested in. Alia told her about this Christian dating site that she'd used, and she'd met a boy online, and this sparked all sorts of ideas within Gypsy Rose because she hadn't yet given up on the idea of her handsome prince coming to rescue her. So using the laptop that she secretly purchased, she would go online and she'd register to the site while her mum was sleeping. And she spoke to a few people online, but it wasn't until she met Nicholas Godejohn from Wisconsin that she felt a connection. Now Nicholas, well, he had some strange interests, and the more they got to know each other, the more he opened up to her about his, attraction in BDSM. And he also had a bit of a past too. He was arrested in McDonald's for masturbating while watching pornography, allegedly for 9 hours straight. I'm not quite sure about the logistics of that, but that's what it says. Anyway, they got to know each other a little bit more. They opened up about their problems, and Gypsy Rose told Nicholas that she was being kept prisoner. Her mum was basically poisoning her with medication that she didn't need. She was forcing her to use a wheelchair. She was shaving her head, pretending that she had cancer and all these other sorts of mental health issues. And Nicholas just accepted her because he had his own issues. He had multiple personality disorders, according to him. He had several personalities, one of them including a 500-year-old vampire named Victor, who was a very violent sort. So the pair of them communicated online for 2.5 years, and they began to hatch plans. Because I don't say plan, there's plans, plan A, plan B, plan C. But one of the plans was, the most innocent plan, was for them to meet and pretend to their mum that they had been strangers, they just bumped into each other, they instantly clicked, and that he could be her boyfriend. And the fantasy was that her mum would instantly approve of this fledgling relationship and allow them to see each other, to where she could eventually escape her mother's clutches. But it didn't work out like that. So they arranged to go to a cinema to watch Cinderella. What else? As Gypsy Rose is dressed as Cinderella, the wig and everything. But the problem was there was nobody else at the cinema. I mean, that it was empty. And Nicholas was like an adult man on his own going to see Cinderella. And he went in and you know, they'd arranged to meet, and instantly Dede did not like this guy. She found him creepy and weird and stalkerish. Anyway, they went in to watch the movie, and he sat beside Gypsy Rose, and you know, her mum just, no, not having this, and she moved and he moved, and she just wasn't having it. Anyway, Gypsy Rose went to the loo, and they went into the male disabled bay, I believe, and they had sex. Because I guess all their relationship had been leading up to this all this time. So the pair of them had sex, and she went back to see Dede, but Dede didn't know apparently what had gone on, and she said to her, "Do not go near that boy, he's creepy as hell, keep away from him." And Gypsy was really, really upset, as was Nicholas. He was angry, you know, he had a temper on him, and this didn't work out as he thought. He had really awkward social skills. He was almost as naive as Gypsy Rose in that respect, that they didn't really understand how the world worked, that these fantasies that they concocted were completely different to how things worked in reality. And of course, Dede was incredibly protective of her daughter, who provided her with a lot of money and attention, and I guess love. I think she did love her in a really weird, claustrophobic, stifling way, and she didn't want to lose any second of that, and didn't want her attention diverted to anyone else. So that plan was scrapped. It didn't work out. She went home, and Gypsy had a big argument with Dede, and Dede called her all sorts of names, and she just went crazy. So Dede found out about the laptop. I imagine she was quite suspicious of this strange meeting. She found out about the laptop. She smashed it with a hammer. She smashed her phone. She threatened to smash Gypsy's fingers if she tried to leave her again. She went crazy, and at this point she started restraining her to the bed to stop her from sneaking out at night while she was asleep. I mean, this is quite torturous, really. And this has been going on since she was a baby, since she was a small child, that her mum has been tightening her grip, tightening it further and further on her. And of course, constantly visiting hospitals with these alleged problems that she didn't have. But Gypsy Rose seemed to kind of go from one really controlling relationship to another. As with Nicholas, he sent her ownership papers. You know, he sent her papers to say that he had ownership of her, which she signed. He sent her scripts. They had these weird videos that would go back and forth in which she would dress up in sexy clothing and wear a wig. And she created personalities of her own to match with his personalities. And he would send her a script about what he wanted her to say. He had a lot of rape fantasies, which she didn't necessarily like, but she went along with online to keep him happy, just as she had kept her mum happy all these years, just as she had played her role to the public. But enough was enough. You know, things came to a head after their meeting failed and that plan didn't work out. And then it was looking at other plans that they'd made, such as arson. They'd looked at poisoning her. They couldn't escape. I mean, a lot of people say at this stage, why didn't she just pack her bags and walk away, have him come and take her away? Well, the problem with that was that Dede had told Gypsy that if it came public about what they did, that Gypsy would go to prison. She trusted her mother complicitly. Her mother was her main caregiver. She was the only person she'd ever known. I mean, you know, in that respect, in a close family relationship, Gypsy was homeschooled. Dede did not get on with her own family, so she didn't see them very much. And Gypsy was very in this tight claustrophobic relationship, and she just believed everything her mum said. So if her mum said, if this comes public, I will tell everyone, this is just as much you as it is me. You've conned all these people out of all this money. We will both go to prison. You will never see me again. You will be on your own in prison and they will give you hell. And that terrified her. Of course it did. So that was hanging over her. If we run away, I'll go to prison. It'll all come out. But it didn't seem to occur to them that if they killed their mum, they'd go to prison, because they really, really thought they'd get away with it. And that just shows another level of naivety on both their parts. So from then on, after this failed meeting, that was when the decision was made. Dee Dee had to die. And they talked about it for over a year in various ways and forms that they planned her demise. Gypsy would later say that she didn't want to kill her mother because she hated her. She said, I just wanted to escape her. I guess it seemed like the only way that she could do it. And you know, in cases of domestic abuse, people always say, why don't they just leave? But it's hard to explain that we're looking at that from our perspective as normal people who have the freedoms to come and go and live normal lives. That's how we look at it. Yeah, of course we would walk away, but these are people that haven't lived our lives, that live completely different life under someone who is incredibly controlling and manipulative, who breaks them down piece by piece, who makes them feel completely worthless, and that if they leave, their lives are basically over and it's not an option. And that's how these victims are meant to feel. So it's really, really tough for them to find the strength to just walk away. So the decision was made to use a knife to kill her by stabbing, and that was a decision mainly made by Nicholas because he wanted to stab her. It was silent, it wouldn't make any noise like a gun would make, or it wasn't as risky as poison, which they said was difficult to find, although God knows they had enough medication. But I guess they just thought that stabbing was the easiest way out. Now Nicholas asked Gypsy to get the implements because he couldn't get access to them, and he obviously had to travel from Wisconsin, so it'd be quite tricky to bring them with him. And he said it was easier for Gypsy because she was in a wheelchair, so she could shoplift and nobody would suspect her. I mean, who would suspect this sweet little girl of out shoplifting knives? But she did, and she stole a knife from Walmart and sent him a picture and asked if it was acceptable, and he said yes. I mean, initially he wanted her to steal a machete, which is like, I don't think that's going to fit into my wheelchair. So she got this hunting knife instead. He also asked her to steal a taser and some tape, and as you'd imagine, she wasn't able to get hold of the taser, but she did manage to get tape, and they had gloves in the house, so they were all set up as far as they were concerned. The plan was ready. So a couple of weeks before Dee Dee was murdered, Gypsy Rose did ask Nicholas if it was possible to perhaps put one of the other plans in place. She said that if she got pregnant, then she would have to be with him, as her mum was religious and she wouldn't let her raise the baby alone, or so she thought. But you know, who knows what could have happened in that situation. I mean, this is a very, very severe case. Most children in these cases end up dead. When they're this severe, they end up being poisoned by their parents. You know, she was in a very, very dangerous position, because with the condition that her mum had, if she'd have gotten wind that there was a chance of Gypsy Rose leaving, whether it be through some pregnancy or any other means, she could have killed her, because it might be easier to live as a mum of a dead child and get all that sympathy, rather than it become evident that she'd been poisoning her for years. And don't forget that Dee Dee got away with a ridiculous amount of stuff over the years. She was a very convincing and manipulative woman. And when she was asked for their medical records by their doctors, she would just say that they were all lost from Hurricane Katrina, of which they were victims. But she had her own big folders and files, and she used to work as a nurse's assistant, so she knew that, you know, she knew how things worked. She knew all about medications, and she had a huge stock of them in a pantry, basically, that was just a medicine cupboard. Loads and loads of tablets with things like Sleepy Baby handwritten on them for her sleeping medication, or Shaky Baby for epilepsy medication that she did not need. So Gypsy Rose asked Nicholas if it would be possible to go ahead with the pregnancy plan. And that would be for Gypsy Rose to get pregnant and for the couple to be together forever, because her mother wouldn't be able to, you know, have her raise a baby on her own. But Nicholas said that his mum would never allow that, and he didn't want that plan. He wanted to go ahead and stab Dee Dee. He had it focused in his mind that this is what he was going to do. And she said, okay, yeah. But he did also warn her, apparently, this is what was said, Now, when he went into the room to stab her, that she was not to go anywhere near them because that his personality, Victor, was so violent that he could turn on her as well. In court, Gypsy was asked why she didn't just stab her mum herself, and the answer surprised me. I thought she'd say it was because she loved her, because it was a weird kind of love-hate relationship. But what she said was no, she didn't, because she'd thought about it for so long, but she didn't stab her mum because she didn't like the sight of blood and that she was squeamish. So in June 2015, on the day of Dee Dee's murder, Nicholas travelled to Missouri and exchanged texts with Gypsy Rose. When he got confirmation from Gypsy that Dee Dee was asleep, he went to the house where she presented him with the gloves and knife. Now, this is going to get a little bit graphic, so it's a little bit of a warning if you want to skip forward. I don't normally get graphic in my videos, but I just feel that this is important to, one side of it, we got sympathy for Gypsy Rose and Nicholas. Some people have sympathy for Nicholas as well. But on the other side of it, you have a horrific crime, and I don't think it's fair on Dee Dee to just skip over this part. So if you want to forward it, the time is in the box below, in the comments below. Gypsy Rose went to hide in the bathroom, where she said she sat in a fetal position with her hands over her ears as Nicholas went to Dee Dee's room to murder her. Nicholas got on top of Dee Dee, which woke her up, and according to him, she said, "Who are you?" To which he replied, "I'm your effing nightmare." He stabbed her 17 times in the back and injured her so badly that he almost decapitated her. He said, "I went as far as I could into her, and not meaning to, I ended up puncturing some very vital parts of her body." Now, what? Not meaning to? Hang on a minute, you've got a guy who's in there to murder or assassinate, as he called this woman, but not meaning to. It's all very strange. Anyway, he obviously did mean to. He stabbed the woman 17 times, and it was a horrible, horrible death. And she cried out several times for Gypsy, and Gypsy heard her shriek and cry, but she didn't go. Now, this is said because she was too scared to go in, but she just waited for it all to be over. Now, according to Nicholas Godejohn, Gypsy Rose wasn't lying there with her hands over her ears. She was shaving her legs as they prepared to leave for their new life. And when she came out of the bathroom, she was naked, and she began cleaning up the scene because he was covered in blood. So after that, they then went to Gypsy Rose's bed and had sex. Now, Gypsy said the reason for this was that Nicola had planned to rape her mother. And she said, "No, don't hurt my mom, hurt me instead, rape me instead." And she gave herself up in her place. He said it was pretty much kind of consensual in a police video later on. Either way, they had sex in Gypsy's bed in the Blanchard house. And Dee Dee's murder was committed at around 3 a.m. according to what Gypsy later said in court. And they didn't leave the house until 6 a.m. And I also found that quite strange, because you think when something so horrific had happened that you would just want to be out of there. But perhaps they'd use the time to just get ready, clean up. I know she had to pack a bag. And that's what they did. They called a taxi to the house, the pair of them, and left. Gypsy later said that they didn't bring the knife with them because she'd never been on a bus before on her own, and she wasn't sure if she'd be stopped, so she decided the best thing to do would be to post it to Nicola's address in Wisconsin, and he went along with that and even put her return address kindly on the envelope so officers would know who sent it. I mean, officers later would say that it was the Hansel and Gretel of cases. I mean, it's a police officer's dream come true of a case forensically wise, because they had left such a breadcrumb trail of evidence behind them. Anyway, they went back to Nicholas's motel room. They were only meant to stay there a short while, but because he messed up with the tickets for the Greyhound bus, they had to stay there a bit longer, and there's lots of footage of them being there at the time. When they did get to his home in Wisconsin, his mum greeted them and asked Gypsy how her mum was, because she'd been told that Gypsy's mum had kicked her out and Gypsy was in a homeless shelter because she had nowhere to live. And Gypsy went, "Yeah, she's fine." And they went and stayed there for a couple of days before they were found by the police. Do you remember those Facebook messages, the ones that said with Dede that bitch is dead, and the one that followed? Well, they were actually posted by Gypsy because she would go on to say that she really wanted Dede's body to be found, that they'd lived in such a bubble, the two of them, that she said it could have been a very, very long time before anyone actually popped in to see if they were okay. So she couldn't bear the thoughts of Dede's body just lying there in the bed alone, and she just wanted it found so she could be buried in a respectful way, which is kind of poignant, really. Gypsy's neighbour had spoken to police and told them about Nicholas and told them about this relationship that had been going on online, so she had her concerns that perhaps he'd taken Gypsy and hurt her. And it came to everyone's astonishment when the police had a press conference and said that Gypsy had been found alive and well, but not everything was as it seemed.
This is a tragic event surrounded by mystery and public deception. Gypsy can walk without assistance or a wheelchair, and she can do that very well.
Think that it's me? Why do you think that it's me? I have always thought my mom and I are best friends.
In the end, Gypsy Rose, I guess she was just backed into a corner, and she did reveal all, and the advice must have come from her solicitor given the overwhelming evidence against her, and that's, in that case, the solicitor would say, look, you've got to go guilty here, but we need to go for this angle that you've been tortured all your life. And maybe she didn't even realise the extent of the torture against her, that this to her was normal life. This is what your mother did, and of course we all know that's not normal, and that's so awful. I mean, anyone would break or snap under those circumstances, perhaps not to the extent she did, but who knows? You know, if you're having your head shaved, I mean, even just that, for a young woman, having her head shaved all the time so she can't have hair, having your teeth all pulled out because of the medication you're on, causing your teeth to rot. All she wanted was to be pretty and look nice, as young girls do, and she was left with a big bruised mouth of molars and terrible, terrible pain. I certainly, on the act, I found that so harrowing, just to watch the abuse against her, like from a very early age and onwards for years. And imagine having someone like in your face all the time, like in your face, singing these sickly sweet songs to you over and over again. And I could see this boiling up and building up. But the thing is, on their own, maybe Nicholas never would have killed someone, I don't know. And, you know, maybe with someone who had more compassion, Gypsy Rose could have found a better way out. Certainly, the doctors in the medical profession surely should be held accountable for the fact that she was passed over time and time again, despite suspicions being constantly raised. And I'm saying, I think this is Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Nothing was actually done or really followed through that we know of. I mean, it's easy for me to sit here and criticise, but it did go on for years. So yeah, they really made the perfect storm. Gypsy Rose and Nicholas came together and they made the perfect storm of awful events that would happen, and of course Dede would end up dead. Gypsy pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Now, the prosecutor said he could have just gone for murder and most likely got the death penalty against her, but he also took into account the extraordinary and unusual, as he called them, circumstances of the case, which I think that's fair. She needed help. This girl needed help, and I think she got a lot of help in prison. She got a lot of rehabilitation, and she would go on to say that she felt a lot freer and was a lot happier in prison than she was living with her mother. Nicholas was sent to life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder, and a concurrent 25-year sentence on the charge of armed criminal action.
Day before I pronounce sentence.
Maybe a little.
Yes, sir.
When this whole thing happened, all I ever really wanted to be is with Blanchard. That's all I ever wanted to be. I've never known what it was like to have a motherly love. I've never known what it's like to have a female connection. I've never known any of that. None of it. Because I've never known it, that's part of the reason why I strive so hard to get it. So much to the point where I don't even understand what it even feels like to have a female connection. It's missing. It's a missing link. It's always been a missing link. I admit it, I was blindly in love. That was always very much the case. It was always that way.
So Gypsy has been making good use of her time in prison. She went on an accountability course, according to her stepmother, and found it really, really helpful and really healing, in which she had to write a letter to her mother, and then she had to figure out the letter that her mother would write back to her. I can imagine something like that would be quite hard to go through, but quite therapeutic at the same time. She's been studying, and she even met someone through a prison pen pal scheme, Ken he was called, and they got engaged. And their relationship, they were going to get married in prison, but their relationship has been very on and off since then, and she was said to have said that really she has to focus on herself first. And I do agree. I don't think it's a good idea for her to get married in prison when she really has never spent time in the real world as herself. Indeed, you know, how would you even know who you are when you've always been brought up to please someone else? But her father has, you know, really come good for her now in building up a relationship with her and her step siblings and her stepmom, who's really been fighting her corner ever since. As for Nicholas, he said he has no regrets about killing Dee Dee. He said, I would have done it again. I would have done it differently, but I would have done it again. And I can only imagine the differently bit means maybe not getting caught next time. And he also claims that they have to be together, that they were destined to be together and they will end up together one day. I find Nicholas just strange and creepy. I'm sorry, I know there's a lot of sympathy out there for him, but I don't think he's as warm-hearted a soul as painted on The Act, which I watched. I know he's mental health issues, and a lot of people would say that Gypsy put him up to it, but from what I could see, he was very much in the driving seat. Perhaps I'm wrong, and I would love to hear your opinions on this. I can only go by what I've read, what I've seen online, and the evidence that's been there for me to look through. And I think a prison sentence for him was the right thing. A death sentence, I'm glad they didn't get the death sentence. And I think really, Gypsy, it's so tough for her, and I feel nothing but sympathy for her now. Honestly, I do. I think it's horrific what her mother suffered and went through, but she was a very, very ill lady and would have most likely killed her in the end, killed her daughter. And I really do feel for Gypsy. And I know when she gets out of prison, she'll still be, you know, in her 30s, so able to start a new life. Nicholas did try to get in touch with Gypsy. He wrote her a letter apparently, but she just said she doesn't want anything to do with him now. And, you know, if people say that Gypsy was a little bit manipulative and she learned how to make Nicholas do what she wants with regards killing her mother, then that's the way she was trained. She didn't get it from the ground up. She was taught by a very, very manipulative and controlling woman. And it's hardly surprising that she used that as her own defense mechanism to get herself out of a situation which would ultimately have killed her. Dee Dee did not have a good relationship with her family, or certainly with her own mother, who was in trouble with the law, as was Dee Dee, in trouble for cheque fraud, for cheating people, for stealing money. But families say that Dee Dee did not care for her mother very well, that she died in bed hungry and dirty, as Dee Dee wouldn't answer her calls. Some are suspicious that Dee Dee may have finished her off, and who knows, it's possible it happened.
What was Dee Dee like as a child?
What was Dee Dee like?
Dee, she was okay. We were pretty close, me and her.
If it didn't go her way, she'd see to it that you would pay. And did we pay? She was putting some poison in my food. The same thing she had put in the plant.
And she wound up, she stayed 9 months in bed. After that, she couldn't get up. I didn't think she was gonna make it.
Her mama was a little bit like her.
Yeah, her mama too. Her mama was a shoplifter and all kind of stuff.
Were you sad at all when you heard she was dead?
I thought it was another one of her tricks.
She got cremated. She said, "What you want me to do with the ashes?" Everybody said, "I don't want her. I don't
Carla
want
said
her."
flush 'em.
I told her, "Flush that in the toilet." They want.
Her sister said flush that in the toilet.
She said, "We're gonna bring that in Mama's room, make her mask and everything." I said, "You gonna pay for it?" "I'm not paying for it." "You gonna get that?" They said, "We can't afford it." I said, "Flush it in the toilet."
So there were further surgeries planned, and this was what also made Gypsy Rose want to go ahead with their plan B, their plan to murder her mother, because she couldn't bear the thought of going through yet another unnecessary surgery. She was desperate to have her feeding tube removed, and doctors had suggested this and even said it was possible, but Dee Dee just flatly refused. And she said leading up to her death that they had a massive row over it. And the night that Dee Dee died, the two of them were in bed together, and this is so sad when you think of it, that she was facing her mum and her mum was facing hers, and they'd met up after the row and they'd had a nice day together, and they'd painted, Gypsy Rose had painted her nails and her mum's nails so they were matching, and she said she remembered her mum just drifting off to sleep, and they were still getting over their argument, and she said the last thing her mother ever said to her was, "Don't hurt me." And Gypsy Rose was honest about her feelings and her upbringing, and that she was asked in court about her mother's moral compass and how it affected her. And she said that she taught me to be a very good liar without any conscience. But I'm learning to be a better person now. So what do you think of this case? I know there's a lot of mixed opinions on Gypsy Rose and Nicholas and how they were treated. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And as always, thank you so much for stopping by. This is a new channel and I really appreciate you telling your friends about it, liking and subscribing. It means the world to me. I have some great videos coming up soon, so do keep an eye out for them. And as always, don't lose any sleep over these true crime stories. They're very unusual and highly unlikely to happen to you. So until next time, bye bye.